Hi, welcome back to Not So Obvious Watches. I'm Pete McConville, and today I'm going to start with something I normally put right at the very end, but perhaps I should bring forward, which is please subscribe. Google is telling me that around about 3/4 of the people that actually watch my videos are not subscribers, and if just those people alone that watch my videos were to subscribe, then there's every chance that I'd hit my first little mini milestone and get those 1,000 subs I'm after. So I'm sitting on around about 180 at the moment. So with the boring channel admin stuff out of the way, now let's get on to the actual reason I'm here, which is to talk about Swatch and what might have been the Basel releases of 2019 if they'd have bothered showing up. They didn't go to Baselworld, and they did have this kind of dealer and media only event up in Zurich, I think it was, or maybe Geneva, at about the same time. But I haven't seen anything concrete come out of that. But what I have done is done a bit of a search around the net and found the Swatch Group releases up until this point that I reckon are interesting and that I think probably would have been their releases at Baselworld. Now, as I said, Swatch Group comprises 19 brands, and I'm not going to run through them all right now. You know what? They haven't all released things which I think are interesting enough to bother making this quick video about. And there's a couple of big brands that are well known, like Longines, Rado, Tissot and Hamilton. I haven't seen that they've done anything interesting in 2019 that I can be asked talking about now, so I'm not going to. But I am thinking that right now there have been some pretty cool releases from Omega, Union Glashutte, Glashutte Original, Mido and Blancpain. So I know I'm going to cover them. And today what we're going to do is look at Union Glashutte, Mido and Omega. I'm going to keep looking at some of the other brands like Breguet and see if they've produced anything. So there will certainly be a part 2 to this, and there might be a part 3. So we're going to start with the Union Glashutte Belisar chronograph. Now, go back a little bit. Union Glashutte is not a brand which is well known in the English-speaking watch community. It seems to be quite big in like Germany and Northern Europe, but even Swatch Group barely bothers to market it outside of that fairly small niche. So we'll do something a little bit unusual for this presentation and just walk quickly through Union Glashutte and describe who they are for those of you who haven't sort of seen them before. Okay, basically they're the little brother to Glashutte Original. They used to use a lot of Glashutte Original movements, but recently they've kind of gone down market, I hate to say. Certainly they've become more affordable and they've been using ETA movements. Those ETA movements are heavily modified by Union Glashutte. Overall they go for a very simple, very German look. They're a classically Glashutte region watch company. Lots of really nice simple three-handers. In terms of complications, you tend to be looking at big dates, power reserves, chronometers and some pilot watches, and I think 1 or 2 GMTs, but no divers and no high complications. So these are really workmanlike, high quality watches. They're also typically quite robust, despite not having any divers. Almost every Union Glashutte watch I've looked at, it would have a minimum of 100 meters water resistance. Finally, Union Glashutte watches tend to live in that $1,000 to $4,000 range, which puts them right in my wheelhouse. That is kind of like my Goldilocks sweet spot, and so I'm really watching this brand, and I have a couple of their watches kind of on my radar, which is really interesting because Swatch seems to have little to no interest in selling it to me, and this is a watch I had to find rather than have it delivered to me, which is probably one of the reasons I find it attractive. So anyway, let's cut to the chase. That's the Union Glashutte sort of company out of the way. What's the model that I'm interested in here today? Well, it's the Belisar chronograph. There's nothing amazing or new or interesting about the Belisar chronograph. It's clearly a retro automotive inspired chrono. The arrangement of subdials is fairly classical with a tri-compacts layout, permanent seconds at the 9, minute counter at the 3, hours counter at the 6, and a small date integrated into that hours counter down at the 6, which is a really nice, neat place to put it. I'm a big fan of the date down at that 6 o'clock area. It's not the most original design, but I don't think that they've actually copied any specific watch in bringing this together. Like a lot of watches, particularly a lot of chronographs, as soon as you start looking at automotive themes, you end up looking at automotive instruments, and that means every watch company that's really drawing from that well is going to end up with watches that fit a certain look. And this watch certainly does fall into that category. So not horrendously original, but at the same time, I'm going to give it a pass mark and say that I don't think it's a copy of anyone else's watch, and it is really, really pretty. You've got to admit, I think they've done this really nicely. Now, it is a big old thing at 44 millimeters across and 15 millimeters thick. I have no idea what it's like, the lug distance is, but I'm guessing this is going to be a fair chunk of steel on the wrist, and you probably want going to be a bigger guy to take this one on. As typical for Union Glashutte, this comes with 100 meter water resistance, which is unusual for a chronograph. As I said earlier, Union Glashutte has kind of pulled back from using Glashutte original movements and now relies heavily upon ETA movements, and that's exactly what they've done here. They've reached into the ETA collection, picked up a Valjoux 7750 and then messed with it enormously. I won't go through all the changes that they've made, but essentially they've made some changes to the way the balance spring is mounted and the way the automatic winding bridges are fixed, which increase rigidity inside the movement and are said to increase accuracy of the watch overall. And on top of that, they've also come up with a new mainspring barrel and made some other changes to the arbor inside that, increasing the power reserve from 48 hours to 60 hours. Really, a little side divert, I think that's an important number. Anything below about 50 hours is kind of here nor there. It doesn't make a great deal of difference whether it's 32, 48, or 50, it's all much of a muchness. But once you start getting up to 60 hours of power reserve, you've kind of crossed a line and become more useful. And the reason I say that is because 60 hours will get you from late on a Friday afternoon to early on a Monday morning. So 60 hours means that you can pretty much wear a watch all week, take it off, put it on your nightstand, and when you pick it up on Monday morning for the work week to start, it'll still be running and won't need to be reset. So like I said, 60-hour power reserve is kind of like is a really useful milestone for me, and I think it's important that this watch has got there. And you're going to get all of this really pretty watch with this heavily modified movement with some interesting added features like the extended power reserve and a more accurate movement for 2,400 euros, maybe call it $2,600. That's a bargain, and I think that's actually a really excellent opening from Swatch and looking at their 2019 releases. So I deliberately started in the middle of the Swatch group with the mid-tier brand in Union Glashutte. Now we're going to go down to their entry level, down to Mido. And Mido have given us a fantastic watch, I think, this year with the Mido Patrimony. Now the first thing is, it's definitely not the most, like the Baselworld chrono that we just looked at, it is hardly the most innovative watch you're ever going to see. It's definitely drawing from this kind of vintage design well that a lot of people are going to at the moment. On the other hand, it doesn't look like any other watch that I can think of off the top of my head. So even though it's clearly vintage inspired, I don't see it as a copy of anything. And also, whilst not the most original, it is, in my view anyway, a stunningly beautiful design. It's really, really nice. Okay, some pretty simple case shaping, but that lovely thin bezel really maximizes the impact of that dial and allows a dial, which might have been a bit busy with that pulsometer scale, to kind of thin out a little bit. I think that they've managed to keep it fairly clean whilst adding some interesting features. Okay, so in terms of size, 44 millimeters across and only 12 millimeters thick. Probably a touch bigger than the emerging theme of where dress watches like this would fit. I think in 2017, 2018, that would have been bang on the money. I think in 2019, we almost would have expected a watch like this to go down another millimeter or so. Funnily enough, I'm not even sure if we would have noticed it. If people had just said this was a 39, we'd probably be quite happy with it and not even notice the difference on it on the wrist. But there's something about that number having a 3 in front of it than a 4. I think if it had gone down to 39 millimeters and say 11 millimeters thick, the world would be going nuts and calling this perfect. I think it's a modern size, but not an absolute up to the second size. As far as everything else goes, look, it's got a box sapphire crystal, which gives it, again, that lovely retro feel, the syringe hands, which back that up, and that pulsometer scale or pulsometric scale. Now, some people aren't going to like that. They think it's a bit busy. I think Patrick Marlette has reviewed one of these, and that was one of his biggest concerns about this watch. Personally, I like it. Now this is going to come predominantly in steel with either a blue or an anthracite dial. Personally, I'd take the blue of all the dial options that have been given. It's also coming in PVD gold. Now, I've got another Mido. I've got a Mido Multi-Fort GMT, which is also in this PVD gold. Now, the first thing I'd say is, being a Mido, and my experience is, it will be applied beautifully and flawlessly. So from that point of view, I wouldn't have a problem. It always looks a bit blingy, it's quite obviously not gold. Now, some people might like that. They might like the idea that this is so obviously not gold. It's not even trying to be gold. It's just gold colored. For me, I don't, even though I've got a watch with this, if you see my view of the Multi-Fort GMT, I wasn't in love with the gold case. So personally, I wouldn't go there, but it's there if it's your kind of thing. It comes with 50 meter water resistance, which is bang on the money for this sort of watch. Unfortunately, having just come from looking at the Union Glashutte, which in a chronograph gives me 100 meter water resistance, the 50 feels it's just a bit stingy. It also comes with a really respectable, albeit like it's an ETA movement. They call it the Mido Caliber 80. It's actually the ETA C07.621 base. Now this watch comes with an 80-hour power reserve. So I said earlier that 60 is kind of like a nice number because it gets you definitely from a Monday to Friday. 80 means that you'll get Monday to Friday scun and won't be a problem at all. So that's a really useful power reserve and something worth noting. Finally, rounding this out, you're going to pay the grand total of $800 to maybe $1,000 for this watch, depending on case finish. Now, frankly, for what you're getting, that's a bargain. And yeah, I think this is again a killer release from the Swatch group, killer release from Mido, and yes, a watch I'm really happy has come out. Okay, let's be honest. In Union Glashutte and Mido, we're talking about some of the small fry within the Swatch group. Let's finish this video off with one of the heavy hitters, Omega. Actually, the funny thing is, I suspect that Longines is actually the main cash cow of the Swatch group, and Omega is more just a poster boy. But it's probably the poster boy because it's the closest to Rolex, and let's be honest, everything in the watch universe revolves around Rolex. So Omega is going to be the one that we talk about today. Overall, I'll talk quickly about everything Omega did, but then I'm going to finish with the watch I think is the highlight. All in all, Omega, first off, they did their usual thing of producing a whole bunch of new Speedmasters. Of all the Speedmasters that they produced, the one that's had the most, funnily enough, buzz around it is the 50th anniversary watch, sometimes called the Moon Watch. I personally call it the Buzz Butt Watch. And I can't really get excited about it. Look, it's very pretty other than the picture of Buzz's butt, but I just can't really get enthusiastic about the Speedmaster anymore. It's a great heritage line, but these extra and new editions rarely stray far enough from the heritage to be interesting in their own right. I take that back. I did find the Dark Side of the Moon variant cool enough to warrant caring about, but that was another year. That's not this year. This year's variants, to me, sort of aren't close enough to being a pure heritage line to be really something I want to buy, but at the same time aren't far enough away to represent anything that's particularly... When we talk about the Seamaster, there were some new colorways. Big deal. So boring, not even going to bother putting up pictures. Now, I am a big... don't get me wrong, though. I am a big fan of the Seamaster range. There are parts of it I don't like. I hate that helium escape valve. But I love that Omega don't pander to this trend for bland and inoffensive dive watches that's permeating the marketplace at the moment. I do feel that with their Seamasters, Omega is willing to try and be bold about the design and give us something new. But on that note, I think they went too far this year with the chronograph. The new Seamaster chronograph, which I'll put a picture up of now, is just too much for me. I think I couldn't do it. Certainly not in the black and gold. Maybe in the blue, I could see this one going somewhere, but you know, it's way too much bling for me to count this as a highlight this year. But there is a highlight for me in the Omega range, and that is the new Aquaterra GMT World Timer. This watch is a killer. Now, it's not entirely new. It is based on a 2017 version, which was only available in platinum, was limited release and prohibitively expensive. So in a sense, Omega's kind of followed a Rolex plan here of release a new watch in a precious metal, limited, super high price. Then if and when it works, bring it out in base metals, although this one does come in gold, so how base is that? But that said, there's enough change in here that I think I'd be willing to call this one a new watch. More importantly, by bringing it out in steel, the price has plummeted. Now, I'll get onto this later, but I almost think they've priced this one quite aggressively for what you get at this end of the market. Okay, so the World Timer is going to come out in 4 versions, very quickly, sort of going from cheapest to most expensive. There's going to be steel with a rubber band, then steel with a steel bracelet, then there's going to be gold with an alligator strap, and then at the top of the line there's going to be gold with a gold bracelet. When you're down the bottom end, you're going to be talking, for the steel and rubber, you're talking around about I think it's probably going to work out to be about $8,500 to $9,000 US. When you get up to the gold, it's going to be up around $35,000 to $40,000 US. Okay, for a fully gold watch, that's not really my place. I don't hang out there much, so I'm not even going to make a comment on the pricing of that. But if you look at the steel version on rubber or with the bracelet, at that roundabout $8,000 to $9,000 US, with everything that you get with this watch, which we'll talk about in a second, that's a fairly aggressive price point. Now, this is not going to be a small watch. The Aquaterra is 43 millimeters across. I have no idea on lug to lug or thickness of this. Omega watches can tend to be a little bit thick, so this is probably going to be a big beefy watch. The lug attachments do seem quite compact though, so perhaps it'll be wearable on smaller wrists. Too early to tell, but right now it's looking like a fairly hefty watch. It's going to come with all the usual Omega tech, you know, the coaxial movement, METAS certification, a whole bunch of anti-magnetism stuff. It's going to be, the movement's beautifully decorated. It's all very pretty. Comes with a 60-hour power reserve, which, as I've said before, is kind of like that sweet spot of covering you over a weekend. So I think all in all, that's pretty good. But now let's talk about the most important thing, which is how it looks. Let's be honest. Okay, in keeping with Omega's philosophy, they haven't played safe here in the looks department. They've really gone big, or they've really taken a go big or go home approach. So, and they've created, it's an interesting watch, and it creates this sort of combination of themes, creating a kind of tension between the simplicity of the base Aquaterra kind of look, but then a really complex 24-hour and world timer map function. And it's that tension that I think gives this watch a really interesting feel. It's kind of both casual and sort of classy or elegant. That said, that's my take on it. I like that tension, and I think they've managed to avoid making it too fussy or overcomplicated, but other people might feel that it's gone too far, especially that kind of heavy relief work that's on that center map. If you're not into it, you're really not going to be into it. So as I said, that base kind of dial, hands, indices compact is straight from the Omega Aquaterra playbook. It's really based quite clearly on that core watch family. But all the action comes with the new, the sort of the 24-hour scale and the new, and particularly that inner map. So that the first thing to talk about is that little sector, the 24-hour ring. Now that comes in a Hesselite crystal, and it's dual coloured, so the daylight hours are in light and the PM hours are in a darker blue. But the real star of this show is clearly that bas relief sort of world map, which is de rigueur for any kind of world timer function, but it has been done in a particularly interesting way here. That map is actually a single titanium plate, which has then been laser ablated away to create this relief. And they've apparently, according to the documents, they've used the natural heat effects of the laser on the base titanium to create the colouring that you see coming through here. And that's both really clever and, at least from the pictures, creates something that's really cool to look at. Now obviously I haven't seen this watch in the metal, so I can only hope that what we see in the pictures translates well into real life. So to sum this up, I think Omega's given us something that's interesting, that's bold, that's clearly part of the Omega kind of history and line and design language, but at the same time brings in something that's really innovative and new and unlike anything I've seen anywhere else. That's actually a pretty killer combination, and bring all that in at like $8,000, and man, if this had come out at Baselworld, this watch would have been, in my view, the star of Baselworld, and makes me wish that Omega had been there, because it would have really brought something special to that show. So that's it. 18 brands. I've covered there's 18 brands in this, 18, 19, something like that, brands in the Swatch group. I've covered 3 today, two good, solid, really interesting watches, but only solid, and one absolute killer that I think would have been the star of the show if it had have been at Baselworld. Okay, that's the part 1 of this. I'll be putting together a part 2 in the next couple of days. Hope you enjoyed this. As I said earlier, I really need you to do your bit now, which is hit the subscribe button and subscribe to my channel. Like I said, there'll be a part 2 of this, and then maybe a part 3, depending on whether I thought that there's anything else interesting in the Swatch group. And then I'll get back to my normal stuff of ranting and raving about the watch group, the watch community, the philosophy of watching, etc. Thanks very much. Bye.